Hello and welcome back to the Hasbijam YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for another personal style video where I take a look at a certain moment in football's history and reflect upon it from my own personal standpoint. I did this a few weeks ago with the 2006 World Cup, and now I'm going to do it with a moment which is perhaps more dear to me in terms of my team and of course the emotions which I felt during that period. Everyone has a realm within which they experience intense emotions on a regular basis, be it music, film or sport, as that is the power that the arts, or indeed any form of entertainment, can have on people, even if they don't really want to admit it. Of course, as you may have gathered by now, mine is football, as by virtue of choosing to support an arbitrary club in the northwest of England, I've committed myself to following the sport and my team ardently, regardless of the desolation or euphoria that they may incite in me. Oftentimes, these two contrasting emotions of desolation and euphoria can follow one another within the space of a day, a game, or maybe even a few minutes. But it is a journey that I, amongst many others, have willingly subscribed to, and I wouldn't change it for anything else. There is one moment, however, as a result of being a modern day Man City fan, which stands out head and shoulders above the rest when it comes to a whirlwind of emotions all at once, and that is Sergio Agüero's famous last minute goal against QPR on the final day of the 2011-12 season to win the Citizens their first league title since 1968 at the expense of their bitter rivals Manchester United. Following on from that video on the 2006 World Cup, which I mentioned earlier and will leave a link to in the description, as well as finally reading Nick Hornby's Fever Pitch, which is an amazing and seminal book on fandom, I decided to tell my story of what happened in the build-up to, during, and after the most iconic moments in Premier League history, and how I felt as though City, and this particular moment, had somehow woven its way into my identity. So much so that I told a friend a few years later that it was the best thing I'd ever experienced, and he simply responded in a very sarcastic tone,
"Wow. Really?"
Yes, really. And here's why. The 2010-11 season had been a good one for Man City, as they won the FA Cup, their first major trophy since 1976, and qualified for the Champions League automatically for the first time in their history after a third place finish. And there were signs that the Sheikh Mansour revolution was not only starting to come together, but gather serious momentum. Transfer business in the summer included the likes of Gael Clichy and Samir Nasri from Arsenal, but it was the transfer of Sergio Agüero for £38 million from Atletico Madrid which really caught the eye and put City down as genuine title contenders. With a squad already consisting of David Silva, Vincent Kompany, Yaya Toure and many others, they were gearing up for something special in the 2011-12 season. Whilst I undoubtedly had an intense interest in football from 2005, I hadn't quite been as patriotically invested in my team up until this particular season, perhaps as a result of not being able to watch the games as often as I would have liked, or perhaps because I just hadn't clicked when watching football live on TV as of yet for some reason. That all changed in 2011, as I made an effort to try to watch as many City games as I possibly could throughout the season, obviously not in the stadium considering I live on the other side of the country, but of course on TV, and it worked. I'm well aware that this sudden spurt of interest did stem from the fortunes of the club turning drastically, but typically speaking, for someone in my position, you only really start to become invested in your team once they start doing ridiculously well in whatever league they are in, or when you attend the stadium for the first time, but once they grapple you in, you're nothing more than a bait hooked up on a line. I now started to well and truly care about the results of my team at a level which I hadn't experienced before, and I was genuinely nervous in the build-up to and during games, with the degrees of nervousness varying dependent on the magnitude of the game in question. This tied into the fact that I was just about to enter my teenage years and the stage where my body started to, with admittedly want of a better phrase, go through the motions of puberty, as I started to catch feelings for people of the female gender and develop a considerable interest in a variety of things, be it music, languages, or, of course, football. Perhaps, therefore, this was a coming of age process, a rite of passage if you will, as though my body told me that now is the time to start becoming overly emotional about things which do matter and things which, in the grand scheme of things, don't, with one of those areas obviously being the fortunes of my team. The prime example of this was when I was unable to know the result of the Manchester derby for a while as a result of it taking place whilst my brother and I were on a flight back home from the south of France. I was incredibly anxious about the game, especially since I would only know upon arrival back home as opposed to receiving live updates throughout the duration of the game what the score actually was. When we touched down and found our parents, my dad told me Man United won, which I thought meant won as in W-O-N and not O-N-E, and my heart sank, but almost immediately he followed it up with Man City 6, and I screamed in triumph. A bit awkward considering we were still in the arrival lounge, but we move. My newfound partisanship would even go to the extent where I even stuck up posters of my favourite players, but mostly Agüero, on as my study wall in my boarding house, which brings me nicely onto my next topic, football banter. With this increase in interest came, almost inevitably, the widespread ridicule whenever my team lost. By sticking up those posters, I had essentially made myself a sitting duck for abuse, but unfortunately, considering I was extremely insecure and fragile at the time, I wasn't able to take the flak on the chin at all. With this in mind, when City lost their first game of the season to Chelsea, a couple of Chelsea supporters, both of whom I despised in any case, were on my case from almost the moment I walked through the door the next morning into school, partly because it's banter, but mostly because they knew I was a target. After a Carling Cup semi-final first leg loss to Liverpool, or whatever the name of the trophy was at the time, buggered if I can remember, I went into the main social area of the boarding house to a tirade of jeers, to which I responded, very boldly,
I support Newcastle.
Since my dad is from there, it was my go-to team when things went wrong, but the posters, as well as my newfound partisanship, didn't lie, and my statement was immediately, and rightfully, ripped apart. It was somehow worse when Man City shockingly lost to Swansea in mid-March, with the defeat meaning that United took pole position in the title race. The abuse following that game from my close friends and almost anyone with some kind of interest in football was intense, simply because it was so unexpected, and because I was right for the picking, if you want to put it like that. It didn't end for at least a week. A loss to Arsenal in April felt like the end of City's challenge, and I remember being depressed for the rest of the day, compounded by eczema on my hand which was getting worse, which wasn't ideal considering we were on holiday with another family who had no connection to football whatsoever. This is what following a team in this situation can drive you to though, and trying to explain why this is the case to non-football fans would almost be like talking to a brick wall, only the brick wall responds with tuts and shakes of the head, almost in disbelief that you have come to this point. However, a miracle happened, as United dropped points in 2 games, allowing City right back into the picture as they won all of theirs, and the game of the Etihad between the two felt like a title decider. When Company scored what turned out to be the winning goal in the game, for some reason I thought he'd missed, but my mum realised that the ball had actually gone into the back of the net before anyone else, celebrating wildly before I obviously followed suit. I went ballistic when they won that game, as well as the next one against Newcastle the week after, to set up the closest final day showdown in the top flight since 1989, given that both sides were separated only by goal difference. As fate would have it, my parents had arranged to see some family friends on the final day of the season who just so happened to have United fans within their ranks, but mercifully we would be staying at home, and it subsequently felt like I had the home advantage over them, even though, of course, it was nothing like that in reality. And so it was, the 13th of May 2012, the day of destiny, the opportunity to see what I never would have thought imaginable when I started supporting the club 7 years ago, and that is City winning a Premier League title. Despite everyone being stationed in the sitting room, I felt like an outlier and decided to watch it in a different room instead, even though it was much lower quality, believing that I could celebrate on my own when the inevitable happened and City raced into an unassailable lead against struggling QPR. United would strike first blood with a goal against Sunderland to put them on top, but I knew that everything would be alright and didn't let the goal affect me that much, and it looked like I would be proven right as Paddy Kenny fumbled Pablo Zabaleta's shot into the back of the net. I've been hitting a balloon up into the air frequently during the game, maybe as a calming mechanism, or maybe because I just love hitting a balloon up into the air frequently, but when the goal went in, the balloon was neglected amidst the frivolity of my celebrations, and I started to watch the game normally after that. At half-time, I felt confident to go and speak to the family who were our guests for the day, not to say that City were guaranteed to win, but simply to say that I was pleased with how things were going. My brother then suggested that, since it was half-time, we go off and play football, and I, perhaps stupidly, agreed, and so off we went with the other family's children to the nearby AstroTurf, where we stayed for about 30 minutes. During this time, I was pretty safe in the knowledge that City had already scored a second by this stage, and perhaps even a third, to wrap up their first title in 4.5 decades, as regardless of what United did, City would have the advantage on goal difference should it be required, unless United could win by a 10-goal margin. However, I was to return home having missed intense drama at the Etihad, as not only were QPR now a man down as a result of Joey Barton being, well, Joey Barton, elbowing Carlos Tevez, kicking out at Agüero and subsequently being sent from the field of play, but also a goal to the good, as Djibril Cissé had equalised not long after the second half had begun, before the depleted side scored what looked like a decisive goal in the title race through Jamie Mackie. I came home expectant, but at first glance at the score, I thought I was seeing an optical illusion before my dad had to explain to me what had happened. It was at this point, as they so often do, that the emotions crept in. I sat on the stool in the sitting room, trying to bottle up my tears which I knew were coming as best as I could, especially since we were in the presence of people who weren't my family. The spectrum of emotions changed from shock to anger to inconsolable frustration to sadness as the seconds and the likelihood of City scoring 2 goals ebbed away, even though they continued to pepper QPR's goal, but without any success. It is this prevalent feeling of powerlessness, as though you have an influence on how the game plays out to begin with, when of course in reality you have absolutely none, that begins to take a hold of you, and that you want to do something, anything, to change the outcome, be in the stadium and be one of the crowd urging on the team, or simply get on the pitch and score the winning goal. Obviously, none of those options are possible, and all I am at this point is a hopeless fan sitting in front of the TV, watching his team letting their what was meant to be inevitable crown and glory slip through their fingers in the most spectacular manner to a team who are fighting against relegation and a man down. How is this possible? Around the 85th minute, the guest family decided to make their way home, by which point I was experiencing a fully fledged mental breakdown. The dad of that family said to keep my head up as things could change in an instant, but I was so certain that United would win that his comments, which were meant to be uplifting, actually had the adverse effect. 2 minutes later, I realised I simply could not take it anymore and left City to lose, going up to my parents' bedroom to stream all my emotions out. My mum came to console me while she was on the phone to someone else, understanding of my pain but well aware that, at the end of the day, it is just a game. From my perspective, it was so much more than that. It was meant to be a moment of pride, of success, of fulfillment, but now all of those emotions and feelings had dissipated. All of a sudden, I heard a shout from the living room from my dad. "Harry, Dzeko scored! It's 2-2! It's not over yet!" Like the masochist that I am, I sprinted downstairs immediately, almost on an impulse, willing once again to support my team in its moment of need, but still safe in the knowledge that the third goal that they craved wouldn't arrive, which perhaps made Dzeko's goal even worse in that they'd come so near, but yet so far. My partisanship once again took hold, and I started shouting at the TV once again in sheer desperation and hope that something was going to break this seemingly impenetrable QPR backline, and when City made a mistake, I almost lost it completely yet again. Then, the unthinkable happened. Nigel de Jong picked up the ball and passed it to Agüero, who controlled it brilliantly and passed it on again to Balotelli, immediately looking for a return ball. Balotelli was stumbling under pressure from the QPR defence but managed to knock it onto the unrushing Agüero, and then Martin Tyler shouted these immortal lines. "Balotelli! Agüero!" It makes me smile every time I watch it. My family by now were all gathered in the living room, and as Agüero got the ball back from Balotelli in what would prove to be his only assist for City, we held our breath, and the moment that Agüero's smash shot hit the net, pandemonium ensued. I've never celebrated a goal as wildly before or since, although Company's rocket against Leicester in 2019 does come close. In fact, my uni flatmates actually thought that something bad had happened when they heard my squeals following the goal. Regardless, my brother, my parents and I were all jumping around celebrating wildly, partly because of the enormity and extraordinariness of the situation, and partly because it was United who had lost, but mostly because they, and I, knew about everything I'd been through in the previous 2 hours or so, and it was an explosion of relief and joy that didn't fizzle out for a while. When the final whistle blew and City were confirmed as league champions, as well as when they lifted the trophy, the same extravagant scenes ensued. What must the neighbours have thought? To add schadenfreude to the situation, when we saw the family whom we'd invited round on that day again the next year, the dad of that family told me that apparently they had been singing in the car home and celebrating the fact that United were going to retain their title, not even bothering to listen to the radio as the drama unfolded, before they got home and realised that it had been snatched away from them right at the end. Whether or not this is actually true I don't know, but if it was, then it just made that moment all the sweeter. One of the best parts of it all, however, was that I could go into school the next day with some kind of diplomatic immunity, in that my team had actually managed to win a league title, and that I was subsequently exempt from any kind of banter or abuse for at least the day. I'm pretty certain I was even congratulated and maybe even applauded upon entrance into the boarding house, as though I had in some way contributed to this triumph. I guess, in a way, that it was merited after what my team had subjected me to for pretty much the entire weekend, and especially during the match, and I walked in with my ego high, my pride untarnished, and a huge smile on my face. My friends had said that they were all caught up in the moment too, and then they thought about me and how I was feeling in that moment as well, which inflated my ego all the more. Ultimately though, even I think it's quite weird that a moment over which I had absolutely no say, control or influence is one of the best experiences that I've ever gone through. But it's true. I would unquestionably rank it up there alongside moments such as getting into uni, going to see my favourite musician live, or even my first kiss. Simply put, the whirlwind of emotions which I had to put myself through in order to reach the end result, which, to all intents and purposes, was worth it 1,000,000 times over, is something which I would happily relive all of if given the choice, provided of course that the end result was the same. But this is what football can do to you, provide moments of frustration and anger, yet also of joy and elation, sometimes disparately, but oftentimes simultaneously. It's almost a carrot and stick policy in that you will gain these rewards and see the successes, provided that you put up with any hardships that come your way. And that Agüero moment is perhaps the epitome of all of that, which is why I personally remember it so vividly and fondly. That just about concludes today's video on my own personal memories of the moments which we colloquially call 93-20, but of course, more broadly speaking, it refers to the moment that Sergio Agüero scored that last-minute goal against QPR to give City their first league title since 1968. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit that like button with such venom that you break it, and subscribe while you're at it. And of course, you can follow me on all kinds of social medias, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and all of those links are down in the description. But thank you very much for watching. Also, comment down below with maybe what other moments you would like me to talk over, maybe other World Cups or other various personal moments. But thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you then.